What if I told you the number climbing on your lab report has almost nothing to do with what you fear the moment you see it? There's something about a rising PSA that took me 11 years to actually understand, something no doctor ever sat me down long enough to explain. A large share of men over 60 who get a routine blood test back will see one number climb higher than last year's, and most of them will carry that single line home like a verdict. I did that for 11 years. You'd think a rising number automatically means the worst is coming, but here's what doesn't add up. In the majority of cases, the research tied to that rise points somewhere else entirely, somewhere far less frightening than what most men assume the moment they see it. In the next few minutes, I'll walk you through exactly what that number does and doesn't measure, and what actually helped me stop dreading it. I keep every result in a small wooden drawer in my study, in order, oldest to newest. Not because a doctor told me to, because I couldn't make myself throw the first one away, and after that, throwing away any of them felt like erasing evidence of something I still didn't understand. My grandson found the drawer once, thumbing through the slips of paper like they were baseball cards, and asked what they meant. I recited every number from memory, in order, before I'd even looked down to check I had them right. 4.1, 5.8, 7.2, 11.6. I hadn't planned to memorize any of it. It simply happened the way a phone number happens, through repetition born of worry, not intention. These days I still open that drawer once a year, right after my annual check, and slide the newest slip in with the others. I don't flinch reaching for the handle anymore, and last month I sat with my grandson and actually explained what each number meant instead of just reciting it at him like a chant. I'm not telling you that to sound like I've got it all figured out. I'm telling you because for a long time I thought a rising number and a rising fear were simply the same thing, permanently bound together. And they aren't. For years, the appointment itself never changed. My doctor would glance at the new number, note that it had gone up again, and say we'd keep watching it. 8 minutes, maybe 9 if the office was slow that day, and most of it spent on my blood pressure and a knee that had been bothering me since spring. I'd leave with a slip of paper and a feeling I couldn't quite name. Something between relief that nothing drastic had been ordered and dread that something drastic eventually would be. I never once thought he was hiding anything from me. I watched that waiting room fill up plenty of mornings, watched him move from one exam room to the next on a clock that wasn't his to slow down. A full explanation of what actually drives that number upward with age simply doesn't fit inside 8 minutes, no matter how much either of us might have wanted it to. What doesn't fit inside 8 minutes has to fit somewhere else, and for a long time, nowhere else is exactly where I put it. So the drawer became my own private ledger of a question nobody had time to answer. I'd sit with it some evenings, not really looking at the numbers so much as looking for a pattern that might tell me something the appointments never had. My wife used to ask what I was doing in there with the light on so late, and I'd say I was just tidying up because I'm trying to understand what's happening inside my own body. Felt too heavy to say out loud, even to her. I tried more than once to find the pattern myself, nothing but the slips of paper and a legal pad. I'd plot the jumps, look for a season, a year, anything that might explain why one climb was steeper than the last. It never worked because the answer wasn't hiding in the spacing between two numbers. It was hiding in what the number actually represented in the first place, and no amount of staring at my own handwriting was ever going to hand me that on its own. I know now that's a common trap, treating the slope of the line as the message, when the real message was in the mechanism behind it the whole time. There was a stretch, somewhere around year 7 or 8, when I nearly asked for a biopsy just to make the not knowing stop. Not because a doctor pushed me toward it, but because sitting with an unexplained number felt worse, some weeks, than whatever the answer might turn out to be. I remember rehearsing the request in the car on the way to an appointment, and then not saying it once I sat down, partly out of nerves, partly because some quiet part of me suspected the procedure wouldn't actually answer the question I was really asking, which was never, what does this specific reading mean, but, am I going to be all right? Here's the reframe that eventually changed how I read every line in that drawer. That number was never measuring cancer directly. It measures activity in the prostate gland itself, and research consistently shows that with age, the most common reason it climbs is that the gland is simply getting larger, a benign, well-documented process, often paired with ordinary inflammation that comes with decades of normal wear. It isn't a verdict. It's closer to a smoke detector that goes off for burnt toast far more often than it goes off for an actual fire. The alarm sounding doesn't tell you which one you're dealing with. It only tells you to go check. I want to be honest about what that reframe does and doesn't do. It doesn't make the number stop rising, and it doesn't replace a single appointment on your calendar. What it does is take away the specific shape of dread that comes from staring at a rising line with no context for why it's rising at all. Once I understood that benign enlargement was the far more common driver, the number in that drawer stopped feeling like a countdown and started feeling like exactly what it is: one piece of information about an aging gland. Nothing more, nothing less. For years, one number ran my life: the PSA. It would tick up a point and I'd lie awake the whole night, certain it meant the worst, picturing the biopsy, the knife, the end of everything. Then someone finally told me the truth no doctor had. That number doesn't measure cancer. It measures your prostate. And as we age, it climbs mostly because the gland is simply enlarging, benign, swollen, and uncomfortable, not the worst. The number was scaring me half to death over something ordinary. And the prescriptions they push to shrink it? They can flatten your drive completely, soften everything, quietly take the man right out of you. I wasn't willing to trade that away. There's a gentle way to support that gland, keep it comfortable, a healthy size, without surrendering any of that. Keep getting checked every year, of course. At 83, that number doesn't own me anymore. I finally have peace. Let me show you what gave it to me in this video. And if you want the simple support I personally use, there's a free presentation linked in the description below. What I eventually found, reading on my own time instead of waiting for someone else to hand it to me, was a compound called beta-sitosterol, a plant compound found naturally in certain seeds and nuts. It isn't a drug, and it isn't marketed as one. It's simply a compound researchers have studied specifically in relation to comfort for men dealing with an aging, enlarging prostate, and a clinical study published in a respected medical journal found that men taking a standardized form of it reported meaningful improvement in urinary symptoms compared to those on placebo: better flow, less nighttime urgency, and easier time simply going about the day without the gland making itself constantly known. I want to be precise about what that means and what it doesn't. This has nothing to do with the number in my drawer. Nobody in that research was measuring PSA before and after, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise just to make the story tidier. What it addresses is comfort, the daily physical experience of living inside a prostate that's been slowly enlarging for years, which is its own legitimate concern, entirely separate from anything a screening test is built to catch. I started eating more of the foods that naturally carry it. Pumpkin seeds by the handful some afternoons. Walnuts and almonds worked into what used to be plain oatmeal. Nothing exotic, nothing that required a special trip anywhere, just a shift in what I reached for out of habit. I didn't stop there, because comfort seems to work better as a system than as a single fix. I cut back on the fried food I used to reach for without thinking, since the research on metabolic strain and prostate symptoms is fairly consistent. The more inflammatory load your body is carrying overall, the more that tends to show up as pressure and discomfort down below. I started walking most mornings instead of some mornings, because regular movement is associated with milder urinary symptoms as men age, independent of anything else you're doing. And I made a point of drinking most of my water earlier in the day rather than right before bed, which did more for my actual sleep than anything else on this list, if I'm being honest with you. None of it happened overnight. It took a little over 6 weeks before I noticed the changes weren't just wishful thinking on my part, before I stopped needing to convince myself and simply felt the difference instead. That's a slower timeline than anyone wants to hear, but it's the honest one, and I'd rather tell you 6 weeks and have it be true than promise you 6 days and have you feel let down. I also stopped grading each week against the one before it because comfort like this doesn't move in a straight line. Some weeks felt like real progress. A couple felt like nothing had changed at all, and on one particularly frustrating stretch, I nearly convinced myself the whole thing had been in my head from the start. What kept me going wasn't blind optimism. It was going back to that same clinical study and reminding myself what it actually promised: moderate, gradual improvement in symptoms, not a switch flipping overnight. Measuring myself against an honest, modest claim turned out to be far easier on my patients than measuring myself against the dramatic transformation I'd half expected before I understood what the research actually said. I took my grandson fishing early last Saturday, out on the lake before sunrise. The kind of trip I used to plan around exactly where the nearest restroom would be. This time I just went, rod in hand, no mental map of facilities, no clock running in the back of my head. We stayed out past 9, and I never once thought about it until we were driving home. I think often about a man named Hoyt, 71, who wrote to me after finding one of my earlier videos. His number had jumped from 6 to just over 10 in under 2 years, and he told me he hadn't slept a full night since seeing the second result. He'd started keeping his own list, too, though his was on a note pinned to the refrigerator rather than tucked in a drawer, and he said his wife had started avoiding the kitchen in the mornings because she couldn't stand watching him read it every single day before coffee. Hoyt told me what changed things for him wasn't a miracle. It was simply the reframe landing the way it finally had for me. Once he understood that a rising number, in the majority of cases, reflects benign growth and ordinary inflammation rather than the disease he'd been bracing for, he said the fridge note stopped feeling like a threat and started feeling like a record. Nothing more dramatic than that. He still checks it every year without fail, exactly as scheduled. He just doesn't read it standing at attention anymore. If you're on medication for your prostate, your heart, or anything else, please hear this clearly. Nothing here replaces your treatment, and nothing here replaces your screening. Keep getting your number checked every year with your doctor, without exception, exactly as scheduled, regardless of how much calmer you start to feel about what that number actually represents. Comfort and monitoring aren't competing priorities. They sit side by side, and neither one is optional. Here's what I settled on: a few drops a day. And let me tell you why it works. One compound calms one signal, but a swollen prostate answers when several are calmed at once. The growth signal, the inflammation, the pressure inside it. So what I use concentrates them, working as one, the way the research actually uses them, not a single ingredient pretending to be enough. A gland that stays comfortable and a healthy size, fewer trips, and the quiet of no longer fearing that number. It leaves the man fully intact, none of that flattening the prescriptions can do. It's linked right under this video, go look for yourself. It won't replace your doctor or your yearly check. It supports the biology right alongside them. I'm 83, and that number doesn't own me anymore. What I want you to walk away with is this. A rising number is information, not a sentence handed down in advance. In the majority of cases, it's telling you about a gland that's simply doing what aging glands do, not delivering news you need to spend the next year bracing for. Understanding that difference doesn't replace a single appointment, and it never will. It just changes what you feel while you're waiting for the next one. I think about the man who used to sit in that drawer's low lamplight some nights, running his finger down a column of numbers, looking for a pattern that might explain what nobody had time to explain to him. And I think about the man I am now, who still keeps that drawer, still adds to it every year without fail, but who finally reads each new slip the way you'd read any other piece of information about your own aging body, carefully, honestly, and without the old dread standing behind every digit. If a rising number has ever kept you up at night, or if you've got your own drawer, your own note on the refrigerator, your own private ledger nobody else has seen, tell me about it in the comments. I read every one myself. And if this kind of honest explanation is useful to you, go ahead and subscribe. There's more of this every week, the kind of thing nobody hands you in an 8-minute appointment, but that's worth understanding all the same.